Behind the golden tan and piercing blue eyes of Hollywood's ultimate heartthrob lies a wild past filled with gang membership, criminal activities, kidnapping plots, and bizarre friendships with convicted murderers. From stealing hubcaps to hiding Pentagon Papers whistleblowers, this legendary actor's life reads like one of his own thrillers. Here are 15 things you never knew about Robert Redford. Fact 1. Gang member and petty criminal. Before Robert Redford became Hollywood's golden boy, he was running with a teenage gang called the Barons and breaking into buildings around his California neighborhood. This wasn't just typical teenage mischief either. Redford and his crew were seriously breaking the law on a regular basis, stealing beer from local stores and committing acts of breaking and entering that could have landed them in serious trouble with authorities. The future Oscar winner described himself during these years as being part of a group that made petty theft their main source of entertainment, and alcohol was often their target of choice when they decided to rob nearby businesses. Redford's criminal activities weren't limited to just stealing drinks, though. He and the Barons also took jewelry and other valuable items during their nighttime raids on empty properties, turning what started as teenage rebellion into something much more serious. This pattern of illegal behavior continued for several years during Redford's adolescence, and it all came to a head when he was 16 years old and finally got caught by police. He was actually arrested and charged with possession of stolen jewelry, which could have completely derailed his future before it even began. The charges were serious enough that they could have resulted in a permanent criminal record that would have followed him for the rest of his life. Fortunately for Redford and movie fans everywhere, those charges were eventually dropped, allowing him to move forward without a criminal conviction on his record. But this brush with the law marked the end of his days running with the Barons and committing crimes around his neighborhood. The experience apparently served as a wake-up call that helped steer him away from a life of crime and toward the artistic pursuits that would eventually make him famous. Looking back, it's almost impossible to imagine the clean-cut all-American actor we know today as a teenage criminal breaking into buildings and stealing from local businesses. Fact 2. Too cool for the graduate. In 1967, when Robert Redford was still trying to make a name for himself in Hollywood, he desperately wanted to land the lead role in what would become one of the most iconic films of the decade, The Graduate. The movie was being directed by his friend Mike Nichols, and Redford was convinced he would be perfect for the part of Benjamin Braddock, the confused and neurotic young man who gets seduced by an older woman and then falls for her daughter. But when Redford auditioned for the role, Nichols delivered a crushing rejection that had nothing to do with his acting ability and everything to do with his natural charisma and good looks. Nichols told him straight out that he couldn't play the part because he could never convincingly portray a loser, and the character of Benjamin was supposed to be awkward, insecure, and unsuccessful with women. Redford wasn't ready to give up on the role, though, and he kept pushing Nichols to reconsider his decision, insisting that he could definitely play someone who was unsuccessful and rejected. That's when Nichols decided to prove his point by asking Redford one simple question that would settle the matter once and for all. Had he ever been turned down by a woman he was interested in? According to Nichols, Redford's response was so genuinely confused that it proved the director's point completely. Redford looked puzzled and asked what Nichols meant by the question, and he wasn't joking around or trying to be funny. The idea of being rejected by a woman was apparently so foreign to his experience that he couldn't even understand the concept, which made it impossible for him to relate to a character whose whole story was built around romantic failure and social awkwardness. Nichols ended up casting Dustin Hoffman in the role instead, and Hoffman went on to receive an Oscar nomination for his performance in The Graduate. Fact 3. Witnessed John Steinbeck's affair. During his teenage years, Robert Redford accidentally stumbled upon one of the most awkward discoveries of his life when he witnessed the famous author John Steinbeck having a secret affair with his friend's mother. This bizarre encounter happened because of a family friendship that developed when Redford's mother became close with a man named Scott, who turned out to be an old friend from her days in Texas. Redford's mother eventually became friends with Scott's wife, Elaine, and young Robert started spending more and more time at their house because he had developed a crush on Scott's daughter, Waverly. The teenagers would often play what Redford later described as mischievous hide-and-seek games that involved testing each other's boundaries and seeing how far they could push things without getting caught by the adults in the house. During one of these typical teenage games of hide-and-seek, Redford and Waverly heard strange noises coming from downstairs that caught their attention and made them curious about what was happening. When they decided to investigate the mysterious sounds, They crept down to see what was going on and discovered something that completely shocked them both. What they found was Waverly's mother, Elaine, in a passionate embrace with a man. But it wasn't her husband, Scott, who she was with. Redford later recalled that he had no idea who the mysterious man was at the time and didn't realize the significance of what he was witnessing until much later. It turned out that what the two teenagers had accidentally walked in on was the beginning of Elaine's big affair with John Steinbeck, the celebrated author who wrote classics like The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men. Elaine would eventually divorce her husband and marry Steinbeck, but at the time when Redford witnessed their secret meeting, they were still carrying on behind her husband's back. Fact 4. Hidden Pentagon Papers whistleblower. In 1971, Robert Redford found himself unknowingly staying in the same house as one of the most wanted men in America when he went to Cambridge, Massachusetts, to work on a script with writer Jeremy Larner. What Redford didn't know at the time was that Larner was secretly hiding Daniel Ellsberg, the former military analyst who had just leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and was now a fugitive from the Nixon administration. The Pentagon Papers were thousands of classified government documents that Ellsberg had stolen from his workplace, and they revealed that the government had deliberately lied to the American people about the Gulf of Tonkin incident in order to justify escalating the Vietnam War. After releasing these explosive documents to the press, Ellsberg had gone into hiding because Nixon's agents allegedly wanted to silence him permanently, and Larner had offered his home as a safe house. While Redford and Larner sat at the kitchen table working on their script, strange noises would come from the back of the house that caught Redford's attention and made him wonder what was going on. Whenever these mysterious sounds occurred, Larner would call out toward the back rooms, telling someone named Dan to quiet down and take it easy, but he never explained to Redford who this person was or why they needed to stay hidden. Redford later described the whole situation as feeling very much like something out of a James Bond movie, with all the secrecy and mysterious behavior happening around him while he tried to focus on his work. He knew that Larner was sincere and well-connected in anti-Vietnam War circles, but the cloak-and-dagger atmosphere of the house made everything feel surreal and dangerous. It wasn't until later that Redford learned the full truth about what had been happening during his stay, and he realized that he had been working on a screenplay just feet away from the man who had exposed one of the biggest government cover-ups in American history. Fact 5. Friendship with Alcatraz murderer. Around the time Robert Redford was playing the Sundance Kid and becoming a major movie star, he felt so dissatisfied with his life that he decided to take off on a solo walking journey through California's Big Sur region, covering an incredible 90 miles on foot. Redford has always had a wandering heart, and this particular trip was his way of trying to reconnect with himself and find some peace away from the pressures of Hollywood fame. During this long and solitary walk through the rugged coastal landscape, Redford met a hotel owner who seemed friendly and welcoming, and the two men struck up what would become an unusual friendship. The hotel owner was happy to provide Redford with a place to stay and someone to talk to during his journey, and Redford found the man's company both interesting and surprisingly comforting during what was clearly a difficult time in his life. What made this friendship so remarkable was that Redford had no idea about his new friend's dark past when they first met and started spending time together. It was only later that he learned the shocking truth about the hotel owner's background and realized just how dangerous this casual encounter could have been under different circumstances. The man who had been so kind and hospitable to him had only recently been released from Alcatraz, the infamous federal prison located on an island in San Francisco Bay that housed some of America's most dangerous criminals. Even more startling was the reason for his imprisonment. The hotel owner had been locked up for murder, one of the most serious crimes possible. Despite learning about this terrifying background, Redford later spoke very highly of the man and credited their time together with helping him get back in touch with himself during a period when he was struggling with the overwhelming success and attention that had come with his breakthrough role in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Fact 6. Kidnapping plot by Nixonites. After Robert Redford starred in All the President's Men in the 1970s, a film that exposed the Watergate scandal and portrayed the Nixon administration in an extremely negative light, he found himself facing real danger from people who were angry about the movie's political message. The film showed Redford playing Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward, one of the journalists who helped bring down President Nixon, and this role apparently made him a target for revenge. When Redford was visiting Paris sometime after the movie's release, he was dealing with massive crowds of fans and aggressive paparazzi who were following him everywhere he went. His publicist became concerned about his safety and decided to hire a professional bodyguard agency to protect him from the mobs and make sure nothing dangerous happened while he was in the city. The security company did some research into potential threats against Redford before taking on the job, and what they discovered was far more serious than anyone had expected. The bodyguards informed Redford that they had uncovered evidence of an actual kidnapping plot against him, and the people behind it were right-wing Nixon supporters who had been offended by all the president's men and wanted to get revenge. According to the security team, these Nixon loyalists had been so angered by the film's portrayal of their political hero that they had put Redford on a hit list and were actively planning to grab him while he was in France. The bodyguards took the threat so seriously that they immediately rushed Redford out of the country to get him away from the danger. Redford later admitted that at first he thought the whole thing was just melodrama and didn't believe any of it was real. However, he was wrong about dismissing the threat, because an independent investigation later confirmed that the people and their plans to harm him were completely genuine. When he saw the evidence and read the reports about the plot, he said it horrified him to realize how close he had come to serious danger. Fact 7. Chronically late to everything. Robert Redford has such a notorious reputation for being late that everyone who works with him has simply accepted it as an unchangeable fact of life, and they automatically assume he won't show up on time to anything. This isn't just occasional tardiness either. Redford's habit of running behind schedule is so well known throughout Hollywood that colleagues and friends routinely plan for his delays when setting up meetings or appointments with him. A Washington Post journalist once wrote that when interviewing people who had worked with Redford, every single person predicted without hesitation that the actor would not be on time for their scheduled meeting. The only question these experienced colleagues had was exactly how late he would be, not whether he would show up at the appointed time, because they all knew from experience that punctuality simply wasn't one of his strong points. His close friend and frequent co-star Paul Newman was well aware of this personality quirk and decided to have some fun with it by giving Redford a gift that perfectly captured his chronic lateness problem. Newman presented him with a decorative pillow that had been embroidered with the saying, "Punctuality is the courtesy of kings," which was both a gentle ribbing about his tardiness and a not-so-subtle hint that he should try to be more respectful of other people's time. The friendship between Redford and Newman was famously playful both on and off-screen, and they were known for pranking each other throughout their long relationship. This pillow gift was typical of their good-natured teasing, where Newman found a humorous way to point out one of his friend's most obvious flaws without being mean-spirited about it. The joke apparently didn't cure Redford of his lateness, though, because the habit continued throughout his career and became something that people in the industry just learned to work around when dealing with the legendary actor. Fact 8. One Scholastic Art Award. Before Robert Redford ever dreamed of becoming a movie star, he was seriously pursuing a career as a visual artist and actually won a prestigious Scholastic Award for painting when he was just 18 years old in 1955. This recognition came at a time when Redford was completely focused on developing his artistic talents and had no interest whatsoever in acting or the entertainment industry. During his high school years in Santa Monica, California, Redford was actively involved in both sports and the arts. But it was his artistic abilities that really stood out and earned him serious recognition. He had developed a real passion for painting and drawing, and he looked up to writer and artist Henry Miller as his hero and role model for the kind of creative life he wanted to live. Redford's plan at the time was to follow in Miller's footsteps by becoming a combination writer and artist who could support himself through his creative work, and the Scholastic Award seemed like a promising sign that he had the talent to make this dream a reality. This was a significant achievement for a teenager, as the Scholastic Art Awards were highly competitive and represented some of the best young artistic talent in the country. The award also reflected Redford's genuine artistic abilities, which he had been developing for years, as a way to express himself and connect with the world around him. In later interviews, he would describe his teenage years by saying that his two main interests were art and sports, because those were the ways he could make meaningful connections with other people and find his place in the world. Even after he became famous as an actor, Redford continued to have a deep appreciation for visual arts and would later study painting at the prestigious Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, showing that his artistic interests weren't just a passing phase, but represented a real and lasting part of his creative identity. Fact 9. Polio led to environmental passion. When Robert Redford was 11 years old in 1949, He came down with a mild case of polio that was serious enough to put him in bed for 2 weeks and cause real concern for his family during a time when this disease was one of the most feared childhood illnesses in America. While his case wasn't severe enough to cause permanent damage, it was still alarming for everyone involved and required careful treatment and a period of recovery. After Redford had gotten better and was strong enough to travel, his mother decided to take him on a special trip to help him recuperate and get back to full health. She brought him to Yosemite National Park in California, and this visit would end up changing the entire direction of his life in ways that nobody could have predicted at the time. The moment 11-year-old Redford saw the massive granite cliffs, ancient sequoia trees, and pristine wilderness of Yosemite, he was completely blown away by the natural beauty and felt an immediate connection to the environment that would last for the rest of his life. This trip sparked what became a lifelong passion for conservation and environmental protection that would influence many of his personal and professional decisions over the decades. The impact of that childhood visit to Yosemite was so powerful that Redford returned to the park years later as a young man and actually applied for a job there so he could spend more time in the place that had meant so much to him. He ended up working at the park for 2 summers, taking jobs at Camp Curry, which is now called Curry Village, and at Yosemite Valley Lodge. During his time working at Yosemite, Redford spent all of his free hours exploring the park and immersing himself in the natural wonders that surrounded him, deepening his appreciation for wilderness and strengthening his commitment to protecting these special places for future generations. Fact 10. Warren Beatty's reject pile. Robert Redford owes some of his most famous and successful movie roles to the fact that Warren Beatty had a habit of turning down great scripts, because Redford ended up getting 4 major parts only after Beatty had rejected them first. This pattern happened repeatedly throughout the 1970s and beyond, creating an unusual situation where one actor's lack of interest directly benefited another actor's career. The first time this happened was with The Sting in 1973, where Beatty was originally approached to play the role of Johnny Hooker alongside Paul Newman. However, Beatty decided that the story was too similar to his hit film Bonnie and Clyde, and passed on the opportunity, which opened the door for Redford to step in and deliver what would become his only Oscar-nominated performance. That same year, Beatty pulled the exact same move with The Way We Were, where he was supposed to star opposite his girlfriend at the time, Barbra Streisand. Instead of taking the role, Beatty chose to focus his energy on campaigning for Democratic Senator George McGovern's presidential campaign, leaving the part available for Redford to take. Unfortunately for Beatty's political efforts, McGovern ended up losing to Richard Nixon in one of the most one-sided elections in American history. The pattern continued with The Great Gatsby in 1974, where both Beatty and Jack Nicholson were offered the title role before it went to Redford. Beatty turned it down because he didn't want to work alongside Ali MacGraw, who was originally cast as Daisy but was dating a studio executive at the time. Even decades later, Beatty was still rejecting roles that ended up going to Redford, including Indecent Proposal in 1993. The director noted that Beatty had shown interest but then didn't commit to the project, which was typical of his tendency to flirt with roles before ultimately walking away. Fact 11. Michael J. Fox audition disaster. When Robert Redford was casting actors for his directorial debut, Ordinary People, in 1980, a young and relatively unknown Michael J. Fox came in to audition for one of the parts in what would become an Academy Award-winning film. At the time, Fox was just starting his career and was years away from becoming a household name through his roles in Family Ties and Back to the Future, so this audition represented a potentially huge opportunity for the aspiring actor. However, things did not go well during Fox's time in the audition room, and Redford's reaction to the young performer was so negative that it became one of the most embarrassing moments in what would later be recognized as a terrible mistake in judgment. Instead of giving Fox his full attention and treating him with the professional respect that any auditioning actor deserves, Redford was reportedly so unimpressed with what he was seeing that he couldn't even be bothered to focus on the performance. The situation became so awkward and disrespectful that Redford actually started flossing his teeth while Fox was in the middle of delivering his audition, which is about as rude and dismissive as a director can possibly be toward an actor who is trying to win a role. This behavior showed a complete lack of professionalism and courtesy, especially considering that Fox was taking the audition seriously and doing his best to impress the famous actor-turned-director. Redford was apparently so convinced that Fox had no potential as an actor that he couldn't even pretend to pay attention to the audition, and his dental hygiene routine became more important to him than evaluating the young man's performance. This turned out to be an incredibly poor judgment call on Redford's part, because Fox would go on to become one of the most beloved and successful actors of his generation within just a few years of this humiliating audition experience. Fact 12. Classmates with baseball legend. Robert Redford attended Van Nuys High School in California during the 1950s alongside Don Drysdale, who would go on to become one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history and earn a place in the Hall of Fame for his incredible career with the Brooklyn and Los Angeles Dodgers. The two future stars were part of the same graduating class in 1954, though at the time neither of them could have imagined the level of fame and success they would both achieve in their very different careers. Drysdale was already showing signs of his exceptional athletic ability during his high school years, and he would eventually become famous for his powerful fastball and intimidating presence on the pitcher's mound. He went on to win the Cy Young Award and played a crucial role in the Dodgers World Series championships, becoming one of the most respected players of his era and cementing his legacy as one of baseball's all-time greats. While Redford was in high school, he also had another connection to the world of professional sports through his involvement with tennis champion Pancho Gonzalez, who was one of the top players in the world during the 1950s and 60s. Redford would regularly hit tennis balls with Gonzalez at the Los Angeles Tennis Club, serving as a practice partner to help the champion warm up for his important matches. This arrangement gave Redford the unique opportunity to work closely with one of tennis's biggest stars and observe firsthand what it took to compete at the highest levels of professional sports. Gonzalez was known for his powerful serve and aggressive playing style, and he dominated professional tennis for many years, winning multiple major tournaments and establishing himself as one of the greatest players of his generation. These early connections to future sports legends show that even before Redford became famous as an actor, he was already moving in circles with people who would go on to achieve extraordinary success in their chosen fields. Fact 13. Studio executives hated him. When the time came to cast the role of the Sundance Kid, in what would become one of the most beloved westerns of all time, the studio executives were absolutely vehemently against giving Robert Redford the part and made their opposition to his casting very clear from the beginning. The main problem the studio had with Redford wasn't his acting ability or his appearance, but rather the fact that he was still relatively unknown compared to his proposed co-star Paul Newman, who was already a major movie star with a proven track record at the box office. The age difference between the two actors also created concerns for the studio executives because Newman was more than a decade older than Redford, and they worried that audiences wouldn't accept this pairing or believe in their on-screen chemistry as partners in crime. From a business perspective, the studio wanted to minimize their financial risk by casting two established stars who could guarantee ticket sales rather than taking a chance on someone who hadn't yet proven he could carry a major motion picture. However, Redford had some very powerful advocates who were willing to go to bat for him and convince the studio that he was the right choice for the role. Paul Newman himself strongly supported Redford's casting and used his considerable influence within the industry to push for the younger actor to get the part, even though it meant sharing the spotlight with someone who might eventually become his competition. The film's screenwriter William Goldman and director George Roy Hill also threw their weight behind Redford and joined Newman in putting collective pressure on the studio executives to change their minds about the casting decision. It took all three of these influential figures working together and essentially putting their collective foot down before the studio finally agreed to give Redford the role that would launch him to international stardom and create one of the most iconic partnerships in movie history. Fact 14. Campus drunk expulsion. Robert Redford's college career came to a disastrous end when he lost his baseball scholarship and was either kicked out or dropped out of the University of Colorado during his sophomore year after developing a serious drinking problem that earned him the reputation as the campus drunk. This dramatic downfall happened during what should have been one of the most promising periods of his young life, when he had been given the opportunity to get a college education and play the sport he loved at the university level. Redford had originally received a baseball scholarship to attend the University of Colorado in Boulder, where he was a member of the Kappa Sigma fraternity and worked at a local restaurant and bar called The Sink, where a painting of his likeness now hangs prominently among the establishment's murals as a tribute to their famous former employee. The turning point in Redford's college experience came when his mother Martha died suddenly from septicemia, a serious blood infection, in 1955 when he was just 18 years old. This devastating loss hit Redford extremely hard and sent him into a downward spiral that he wasn't equipped to handle at such a young age, especially since his family had a tendency to deal with tragedy by remaining stoically silent rather than talking about their feelings or seeking help. In response to his mother's death and his inability to process the grief properly, Redford began drinking heavily and lost all focus on his studies and athletic responsibilities. His behavior became so problematic and his drinking so excessive that he became known around campus as the person who couldn't control his alcohol consumption, and his academic and athletic performance suffered dramatically as a result. The situation became so bad that he eventually lost his half scholarship due to his poor performance and behavior, and his college career ended in failure rather than success. After leaving Colorado, Redford decided to travel to Europe to try to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. Fact 15. KGB took his movie seriously. Robert Redford's 1975 thriller 3 Days of the Condor was such a convincing portrayal of CIA operations and espionage tactics that the real Soviet KGB actually began developing similar clandestine operations based on what they saw in the film. This incredible situation shows just how realistic and well-researched the movie was, to the point where actual intelligence professionals from America's biggest enemy during the Cold War thought the fictional spy techniques were worth copying for their own use. 3 Days of the Condor starred Redford as Joe Turner, a CIA analyst who reads books and documents in what appears to be a normal library but is actually a secret intelligence facility. When Turner returns from lunch one day, he finds his entire team murdered and realizes he's been framed for the crime, forcing him to go on the run while trying to figure out who wants him dead and why. Director Sidney Pollack took extraordinary care to make sure that all the CIA activities and spy work shown in the film felt completely authentic and realistic, consulting with intelligence experts and doing extensive research to ensure that the fictional operations could actually work in the real world. This attention to detail was so thorough that the movie's portrayal of espionage techniques and covert operations was essentially indistinguishable from actual intelligence work. The precision and realism that Pollack brought to the film's depiction of spycraft was so impressive that when KGB officials saw 3 Days of the Condor, they were convinced that the techniques and procedures shown on screen were based on real American intelligence methods. Rather than dismissing it as Hollywood fiction, they took the movie seriously as a potential source of useful information about how their enemies operated. The Soviet intelligence agency became so interested in the film's approach to clandestine operations that they actually started incorporating similar tactics into their own real-world spy activities, essentially using a Robert Redford movie as a training manual for their agents.